not an urban myth, but a true story, that Yitz Greenberg, the first Hillel rabbi on campus, was chastened by the first president of Brandeis when he saw Yitz walking across campus with a kippah, and he told him to take it off.
I mean, one of the hurdles we have with teaching Jewish students anything Jewish in its original text is that there's a language barrier. You can't even sit down and open up a chumash and say, "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es." This is the language of our civilization. The Christians come to our table at Yale, and they know the New Testament, they know the Old Testament. They're quoting Isaiah 9, Isaiah 7, Jeremiah, and the Jewish kids are looking at it. They couldn't even tell what the Ten Commandments are.
I am just so delighted. Mark and I want to take this moment to welcome all of you, old friends and new friends. And before I have the opportunity to introduce these three amazing people to my right, I just wanted to share a few remarks. It actually seems very perfect that we're hosting this conversation in our home. And I will tell you that Mark and I had the deep honor of having Toby and Shmully in our lives when we were on Yale campus as grad students. And for those of you who don't know, I actually grew up in a non-Jewish home. And in the early years of Mark and I's relationship, really the two of us together created a journey for the kind of falling in love, and myself falling in love with Jewish traditions, and fell in love with Shabbat. But it was very much a experience together, and we did not have a community. Oh, brilliant. Thank you. That's so well played. And it was very hard, actually, being, especially in medical school at the time for myself, to find a community where we could really be ourselves and also bring some of the joy that we had experienced with one another in our Jewish journey, and also the kind of intellectual pursuit that I think both of us were seeking. And we were so delighted to come to High Society, as it was called at the time, and actually spent every Shabbat there, singing our hearts out. And we would meet also for bourbon on Wednesdays and deli, and really dive into a lot of ideas. And I will say that Shmully and Toby just welcomed us into their world and their life in this amazing way. And Chai Society really became a home for Mark and I to grow Jewishly. And so when I decided to convert, it was very clear who I wanted to convert with. And Shmully was so generous in this kind of unbelievable way with his time and his ideas. And I spent an entire summer in medical school biking to your guys' place and really doing a deep dive on all kinds of history and philosophy and religion. And I really felt like it gave us this incredible foundation for our life and for the community that we have built here, some of whom are in the room now. And I know that we have new friends in the room as well. And this evening, thinking about the world that we live in right now, I know it's a very frightening time for so many, and an emotional time, and in the, sort of not just anti-Semitism, but anti a lot of things, and thinking about those who are marginalized, and how do we have this conversation to really think about how do we build bridges back to each other? How do we get to really listen to each other? I felt as a physician working in the pandemic that we have always known we are deeply interconnected. And yet we remembered that in the pandemic. And I feel like we've lost sight of that again. And so how do we remember that we're interconnected? And how do we keep the dialogue, this intellectual dialogue that's happening, and bring forth this idea of finding each other's home and finding each other at home with each other. So with that, I will take a moment to introduce first I'll start with our amazing moderator, who I just had the opportunity to meet tonight. So Dr. Jessica Liebowitz, who has a PhD and has worked at Brandeis, really focusing on computer science. And I love this idea of this lab that you have, this innovative lab that really looks at bringing data science and machine learning and artificial intelligence into higher ed. And boy, do we need that more than ever. So I'll definitely be picking your brain in terms of all of that in medicine, and actually also works on teaching Hebrew language. So we have some scholars, budding scholars in the room, and culture at Brandeis, and is chair of the advisory council for that, and got a PhD from right down the road at Harvard, and was at Yale. So lots of common roots here. And to her far right is Ron Liebowitz, who is also the president.
It's not that far right.
Yes, maybe slightly
He's
far
right, he's
right.
right.
Yeah, you're definitely not central. But yeah. Ron Liebowitz, who I think probably most people know, is president of Brandeis, and serving as the 9th president. Is that correct? And came from Columbia prior to that, and also Middlebury College. So we have some friends here from Middlebury College who drove down, and really has really done a remarkable job at Brandeis and focusing on transparency and accountability, which feel very apropos to our conversation tonight. So we're so thrilled that you are here. And Shmully Hecht, who has a long bio, but he really didn't want me to say anything about him besides the fact that he is a co-founder and rabbi at Shabtai, which is now the home for this intellectual thought and dialogue in New Haven that is now becoming a global phenom. And so we're just so grateful to have the next conversation here at our home in Boston. So let's give them a round warm of applause and welcome them.
So for our opening question, we're going to ask, please, that you share with us your perspective on the place of the Jew on campus. And we ask that you include some historical context of the institutions that you represent, Brandeis University and Yale University. In addition, let's be sure to take advantage of this wonderful gathering that we have. One of the advantages, the key virtues of this conversation is that we have two leaders here with vastly different roles and responsibilities. And so even if you share similar perspectives on the topic at hand, the Jew on campus, you will naturally have very different approaches to it. And so we will be very interested to hear in your opening statement how your perspective is connected to your role either as university president or university rabbi. So maybe we begin with
I'll take the
president.
university president one.
Okay.
I know something about that. Thank you, and thank you.
Presidents always speak first, so the rabbis can critique, so we can critique what the
I
president.
know, I knew you were going to say that. Anyway, thank you for hosting, Mark. Thank you very much. So history is important, and Brandeis is something somewhat unique in this question that Jessica has raised, different from almost every other institution. We are sui generis in a way, founded in 1948, just for those who aren't familiar with Brandeis's history. Following World War II and following the Holocaust and following many decades of the pursuit for finding a place for Jews on university campuses. And it was 1948, it really did probably take the war effort, the war and what happened in the Holocaust to sort of make this a success. But in 48, when Brandeis began with 107 students, it was open for all. It was not just open for Jews, but it was really open for Jews in order to, as Albert Einstein said, find a place where young Jewish men and women could find good educations in science and mathematics, something that he feared was not happening as a result of the quotas in most American universities. And so in 1948, when 107 students showed up, Probably 95% of them were Jewish. Over the course of the next several decades, the percentage of Jews started to decline. Most influenced in 1958 by really the first international student program in the United States, the Wien International Scholars Program, which in 1958 sought to diversify, the first diversification of the student body at Brandeis, with international students to bring perspectives to the classroom and to the campus, to the residence halls that really wasn't there. I think founding president Abram Sacher found after 10 years that the population was fairly homogenous, mostly Jewish, mostly from middle to upper middle class, and the perspectives that students were sharing with one another wasn't so diverse. And so in came the Wien program, which represented 10% of the student body. And to quote some alums from that period, they would say that that program really blew the intellectual doors off the campus, that in came students from all over the world, including from Africa and Latin America, which brought very different perspectives into the students' lives, many students who were sheltered before. And so that was the first wave of diversification on campus. But it really wasn't until the 60s and 70s when things started to change dramatically on campus, when the university grew in size, that it really began to diversify, and the whole question of Brandeis's Jewishness came into being. If you speak to alums from the 60s and 70s, it was just a matter of course. It wasn't even a question as to whether or not one was Jewish. The campus was Jewish. We don't even have a Hillel or a Jewish center on campus, mostly because the thought was the majority of campus was for the Jews. You didn't need such a thing. Well, today, the percentage of Jewish students is now about 30 to 35%. That's students who state their religious affiliation, about 30 to 35%. It's very diverse. We have more than 20% of the population is international, the majority of those coming from China. But there is a very, very strong Jewish presence on campus. If you talk to the non-Jewish students on campus, they'll complain that they don't feel necessarily at home because the place feels so Jewish. Brandeis still runs on the Jewish calendar, and so students walk around campus, wondering why they have off on Shmini Atzeret. In fact, many Jews wonder why they have off on Shmini Atzeret. But in any case, it still has a very, very Jewish feel. The numbers, some people are concerned about the numbers. I know that my first year when I began, Len Sachs, who's here and is a demographer and does these demographic studies, was about to publish a report that showed that Brandeis was less than 50% Jewish. It was really the first comprehensive survey done of our student body. And the Board of Trustees called an emergency phone call that I had to jump on. I wasn't yet president. I was coming in July, but this was now in May. And Len had announced that he was going to publish this findings. And the older alums, of course, would freak out. This was the response by the board, that if we're under 50%, it's going to be a disaster. And we had about an hour-long conversation, and I was the calmest one on the call. I said it really didn't matter the percentage. It really mattered what the feel was and really what the place of the Jewish student was in terms of what that individual felt, how that individual could express his or her Jewishness. In any case, we got through that. The report came out, and the response was not nearly as drastic as many people had thought. But this history is now still controversial. It's very controversial among the older alums. It's generational. The younger alums see the diversification, of course, as important to their education. They see it as important to fitting in at Brandeis. But I'll just stop and say that at this point, even though the percentage of Jews on campus might be 30 or 35%, the feeling still remains very Jewish. The feeling among the Jewish students is very strong. The Jewish students on campus don't feel in any way, I think, what we read about Jewish students on other campuses, which is why I say Brandeis still remains somewhat sui generis in this sense. And I think it's a question that we're now facing as a result of growing anti-Semitism in the country. What should the percentage of Jews be on campus? Should Brandeis be a haven for Jewish students to come? One of the things, of course, that has happened too was the change in other universities' approach to Jews. Some of you might remember that back in the 1990s, Gordon Gee made headlines when he was president of Vanderbilt University. Front page story in the Wall Street Journal, where Gordon Gee said, if Vanderbilt wants to become a first-rate research university, it must have more Jews. And of course, that was a shocker at the time in the 1990s. But many schools followed suit. If you look at which schools are now really attracting Jewish students, it's the Tulanes, it's the WashU in St. Louis, it's the Emorys, it's the Elons in North Carolina. A bunch of schools have taken this approach of building wonderful facilities for Jewish students and also opening their doors for Jewish students. This, of course, had an impact on Brandeis, and it also has forced us to think about what we need to do to respond. I would just summarize by saying that, yes, the percentage of Jews over time has changed. The feel on campus is still very strongly Jewish, and I think our Jewish students thrive.
Rabbi?
Shmully.
Yeah, but from the rabbi's perspective.
Oh, okay. I do comedy on Wednesdays. I'm doing the rabbi
Okay,
tonight.
okay.
Okay. I just have to remember which event this was. So we say Paischin b'chvei achsanya, which means that we recognize our hosts when we have an event. So I just want to thank God, of course, for giving us life to be here tonight. And I'd, of course, like to thank Mark and Catherine for opening your home. It's wonderful to be here. And, of course, to Jessica and President Liebowitz for giving us this amazing occasion. But most importantly, I can't continue without mentioning your dad being here tonight and mom.
Where is she?
Why is your mom sitting in the back? Should I? I'll come in the back. I'll do this one.
She's reading from behind. She's amazing.
It is wonderful to see you both. And Catherine and I were just reminiscing today. The last time we saw you was at the wedding, and I remember your speech.
20 years ago on Thursday.
Yeah,
Wow.
God
Masal tov.
Yeah. With Jim and Alana, who were just at our house now. It's wonderful. So I'm going to scratch the Jew on campus. I'm just going to repeat David Grogan's speech at the wedding.
Okay, good.
He spoke about Ruth. It was wonderful. It's an honor to be in the room with you. God bless you. Long life, mom and dad, and wonderful grandchildren.
Not too long.
There's always bourbon. There's always bourbon. There's always whiskey. Yeah. And psychedelics are back. So, yeah, from the 60s, they're back. So I want to start off with a story about the rabbi in Krakow, because I don't really do public speaking, as you'll see. I'm not a public speaker. I like to entertain and listen most of the time, but it's an honor to do this tonight with you. And most importantly, because your son is a freshman on campus, and he's here tonight. So I don't do public speaking, and so I'm not rehearsed, and I don't get coached. So I'll just start off with a story about as a rabbi, Jessica. Thank you. The rabbi in Krakow got up one Saturday morning at the pulpit, and he said, "Oi, oi!" And the community, everybody leaned forward. What's wrong? The rabbi of Lemberg died. Oi, the rabbi of Lemberg died. That's terrible. So the community got up and they said the Kaddish and the Yiskar, and they started to mention what a great man he was, and they mourned and they wept and they cried and they opened up the ark. The rabbi of Lemberg died. Okay. So a few weeks go by, and there's a bunch of peddlers that are, trading their goods, their wares, and they show up in Krakow, and they're coming from Lemberg. And so the community goes out to greet this delegation that's come to trade in Krakow, the big city of Krakow. And the first thing, of course, they say is, we want to console you for the death of the rabbi. We heard the terrible news a few weeks ago at the pulpit from the rabbi. And these guys from Lemberg said, "What? The rabbi's doing fine. He's great. The rabbi didn't die. Our rabbi's alive and well." And so they go back, and we've got to get rid of this rabbi. He seems to be lying at the pulpit with the ark open. And so they go back and they tell the rabbi, this delegation, with all due respect, came from Lemberg, and they said that the rabbi's alive. And they tell the board of directors of the synagogue that we've got to get rid of the rabbi. And so the president of the board of directors says to the community, the rabbi's not an imposter. Big deal. He didn't know that the rabbi didn't die. But the fact that he could see all the way from Krakow to Lemberg, that was a big deal. So the Jew on campus, you can look at it from different angles and different perspectives. I won't repeat the history, thank you, of Brandeis, and I don't represent Yale. The history of Yale's Jewish admissions and their policies and the quotas is just like Princeton and Harvard. There are two very good books. One is called Chosen. The other is called Joining the Club. And you can go home tonight and read those books if you want the details of the history. We start off in the beginning of the 20th century with somewhat of a meritocracy acceptance. The 1920s, we start with the immigration restrictions, hence the restrictions of Jews. And then we go into the 60s where there's tight quotas, 10%. And then the 70s, the Ivies open up. And Brandeis is a little bit different, of course, because it's an emerging university founded by Jews. The 70s opens up, the 80s opens up. And then, of course, 25% of the better schools have a Jewish, 25% of the population of the better schools, the top 10, maybe 20 schools have Jewish representation, and it's wonderful. So I just want to say something about my experience with the Jew on campus and how I met Jessica, actually, and why we're here tonight. We wouldn't be here if not. So in 2001, Yale celebrated its tercentennial. And we, as a fledgling 5-year-old Jewish society on campus, went to an alum and said, we have an idea. Why don't we interview the 300 of the most accomplished alumni of Yale in all different fields and ask them to talk about their lives, their experience as Jews, and their experience at Yale. And we compiled a list of 3. And if you get 3, you get 300 very quickly, because who doesn't want to be part of the project? And so we went around the country. We sent out a film crew for about 2 years, and we interviewed 300 leaders of culture, society, academia, journalism, to talk about their lives. And of course, Jessica was on the list as an alum of Yale College. I believe you were editing a magazine at the time.
Yes, exactly. The Gallup Magazine.
Yeah. And so that's how we met, Jessica, and we've stayed in touch ever since. I didn't go to the interviews, but the tapes would come back to New Haven. From time to time, I'd open one up and just listen to what people have to say. I read some of the transcripts. It's a 500-hour oral history project of Jews who had gone to Yale. And what's fascinating about it is that one of the common threads or themes of these interviews, starting off in the 1940s, right? So you started in 48 at Brandeis. The 1940s, you have Jews at Yale. Going into the 60s and then the 80s, that was kind of the time. One of the interesting kind of sad phenomenons is when the question was asked to these people who are CEOs of companies or senators or tenured faculty or deans about their American Jewish experience. In most instances, most of the people, and I don't believe this is particularly Yale, it's probably the same if you went to any of the top schools in the country, was nominal. There wasn't really much of a Jewish identity for secular American Jews. And so when the guy they weren't sent the questions in advance. And so when the question was asked, talk about what it meant to be a Jew in America in the 1950s. Well, Jewish for me was education. Jewish for me was about immigration. Jewish for me was being a minority. Jewish for me was anti-Semitism. And then when it got into what your Jewish education, in most cases, most instances, these alumni had not had formal Jewish educations. So they went to Sunday school. None of them wanted to be in Sunday school. They had a terrible experience. They wanted to play in Little League. They wanted to go swimming or play tennis. Their parents sent them to Sunday school. And so if you watch this collection of some of America's most prominent people and some of the most prominent alumni of Yale, and you listen to their story of being a Jew in the 20th century in America, they have very little to say about Judaism. They know very little about Judaism. Most of them don't read Hebrew, can't speak Hebrew, can't open a Bible in its original language, wouldn't know which way you put a Talmud, whether it was upside down or not, because Aramaic is an odd language. Their experience with Judaism in most instances was a negative one. They were beaten up in Hoboken, and I'm not going to go through the names and the episodes. The stories are unbelievable stories. Some of these people have their names on buildings today at Yale because they were major donors to, thank you, major donors to the university. And they were ignorant. Maybe one or two Orthodox or traditional or rabbinical. Most of them were ignorant. And their Jewishness, I would say, from a sociological perspective or cultural perspective, was much more about being a good American. America is a country of education. America is a country of immigration. America is a country where we protect minorities. So I didn't find much particularly Jewish about their Jewish identity. And it was frankly pathetic. And it was really sad to listen to these leaders of industry knowing very little about their Judaism. And this was 5 years after arriving on campus. And I looked around the campus and I said, I'm not sure things are very different right now on this campus. What is the Jew on campus? The Jew on campus used to be from Long Island. He's white. His parents are lawyers and doctors and maybe bankers or in education. And he comes to Yale. And if you were to ask him what it means to be Jewish, he'd probably say the same thing they said 25 years ago. So he didn't have a 6-day war experience where the existential crisis was in front of them. He didn't have the formation of the state of Israel, where Jews were finally having an independent country. He wasn't part of a quota and rejected by most schools. In fact, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Columbia and NYU and Brandeis and maybe the other schools were probably fighting to get him. And so he chose to come to Yale. It was during that time, we're in Catherine's house, that Catherine and I and Mark met. And we didn't see each other for, I don't think we saw each other for 18 or 19 years. We corresponded on email and by postcard and by just annual updates. And then about 6 months ago, we met again in Boston at an event like this in someone's house. And the moment I saw Catherine, she started to sing Harachamanu Yanchilenu and dance in Aaron Hakim's house. And I just had a flashback. It was a song that we sang every Friday night in the Hebrew words. And you danced the way you danced 20 years ago around the table. And I said, wow, look what a song can do. How amazing. We sang that song every Friday night and we're still singing that song. And you didn't just get on your bike and come from the med school to my home at the time on Orange Street, but we opened up the text and we delved into the text and we explored the text and you asked questions and very good questions. In fact, I told you may want to reconsider. Who wants to be Jewish? I mean, it's utterly ridiculous to want to convert to Judaism. I mean, how many of the Jews in this room would convert to Judaism if we were born outside the faith? Probably a minority of us. We know how tough it is and how wonderful it is and how challenging it is. And so we spent that time. And as a rabbi on campus, I think that's what I focus on. That's my job. That's my life, together with my wife, Toby, our organization, is to think about what is our generation going to tell in 25 years when they get interviewed to talk about their experience as a Jew who went to Yale. And that's where I am.
I want to follow up on that exactly, this rabbi's perspective. I wonder if it's broader than just for a rabbi. I want to make reference to an article by Michael Steinhardt recently. In a recent article on Israel's 75th anniversary, Michael Steinhardt argued that, quote, Israel is doing fine. We're the ones who need help. Because, as he says, the most obvious thing we need can be summed up in 2 words, Jewish pride, and that's what Israel is able to provide for, diaspora Jews. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, well, picking up on your comment, but your perspective on that, specifically the way Israel plays on American college campuses.
Israel on American college campuses.
And what role Israel can play for the absence of Jewish pride or Jewish connection that.
Well, again, I do think this is very historically situated. It depends what you're talking about and when you're talking about it. At a time, Israel did, of course, provide that sense of pride for diaspora Jews. Today, it's very different. It's very different on most college and university campuses. And again, I distinguish Brandeis from many others. In my 7 years at Brandeis, we've had 2 or 3 incidents of at least outward protest against Israel, orchestrated usually from folks from Cambridge, not necessarily from on campus. One Israeli Apartheid Week celebration a few years ago, a BDS rally with 15 students about a month or 2 ago, and maybe 1 or 2 other instances. So in Brandeis, you don't see this outward aspect of anti-Zionism or anti-Israel. I do think a lot of these issues are suppressed at a place like Brandeis. I think among the Jewish students, there's no doubt that there is still a huge sense of pride when it comes to Israel. There are many Israel-oriented organizations on campus that are flourishing, be it in entrepreneurship, in economics, in business, in culture. They're there. That's true. So again, Brandeis is a little bit odd in this. I will say, though, to follow up on something that Shmully did say, Brandeis was founded as a secular institution. It wasn't founded in any way related to religion. And in fact, our founding president, Abe Sacker, made that very, very clear. In fact, there is not an urban myth, but a true story that Yitz Greenberg, the first Hillel rabbi on campus, was chastened by the first president of Brandeis when he saw Yitz walking across campus with a kippah, and he told him to take it off. That's how strong the secularity of Brandeis was at its founding in '48. I think, if anything, there's more religion on campus today than there was, of course, at its founding. I think this reemerged probably over the last 20 or 25 years. We have some Brandeis folks here who have been at Brandeis much longer than I have, and they can speak to that. But in terms of a sense of pride, at least on our campus, I feel a great sense of pride among the Jewish students. I do feel the tension among the non-Jewish students to some extent, but I do think it's a little bit of an anomaly at the Brandeis.
What's your feeling about Michael Steinhardt's claim?
Excuse me. I actually went to see Michael Steinhardt, as I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago in his house. We had hosted him on campus about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. Toby is my brain, thank God. Maybe 10, 12, 13 years ago, only because the guy who used to buy his art at the time, Richard Fagan, who had a big gallery in New York, the Fagan Gallery, was Richard Fagan. Well, it depends where in Europe you're from. You say Fagan, I say Fagan. Yeah. I'm Polish. I guess you're I'm a Galiciana. Okay, Fagan. It's Fagan. Yeah.
Fagan is, a whole other story.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, and so he invited Michael up, and they actually got on a train and came up and sat and had Shabbat dinner with us. And Michael said, "What do you want me to talk about?" And I said, speak about Jewish leadership and the future of Jewish leadership. It was wonderful. He went home. I went down to see him, I think, as a follow-up, and it didn't go anywhere. He's, was not a Yale alum. We had a great chat. He kibitzed, he joked. A few weeks ago, I decided I wanted to talk to him, so I sent him an email, and I said I'd like to come down. I went down to see him. So I sat in his house in New York with an alum of ours who graduated at Yale College about 20 years ago. And we talked. And Michael Steinhardt, for about 2 hours and 45 minutes, lamented about the state of affairs today. The failure of Jewish philanthropy, the failure of the federations, the failure of Jewish institutional life. And we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this and hundreds of millions of dollars on that. And what do we have? Where is Jewish life in America today after this huge amount of money with creative efforts to engage our people with being more Jewish? The Mormons have very good statistics of you send a kid out, you give him a backpack, he comes back, he's got to give you a list, like how many people joined the church, right? And who are they and what do they do? And you want to do these studies and ask yourself, what are the results? And Michael was very, very upset. And we were just sharing this sort of common reality today. So my response to that is this. Michael Steinhardt wouldn't let a rabbi run his hedge fund. And he wouldn't let a gambler run his hedge fund. Michael Steinhardt hired people to run money on Wall Street that knew how to run money on Wall Street. And so my response to Michael Steinhardt and all his friends, who clearly have failed to some extent, they've done tremendous things, and some of the programs have been very successful. But if we are still the same place we were 25 years ago, or maybe 35 years ago, 40 years ago, 5 years ago, and we're not seeing the kind of results we would like to see in Jewish engagement, despite having pumped so much money into Jewish outreach, we have to ask ourselves why. Michael Steinhardt's an atheist. He's a self-confessed atheist, and he wants Jewish pride. Michael, you've been very successful. All the Jews are still atheists. And, to the extent that they're proud, Jews are proud. They've got some issues with Israel. Maybe Israel goes a little to the right. Israel goes a little bit over to the right, and people get upset. But if you want Jewish outreach, yes, Jews are agnostic. Yes, there are Jewish atheists. But what's the agenda? What do you really want to do with Jews? Do you want to bring Jews closer to God? Do you want to bring Jews closer to the Bible? Do you want to bring Jews closer to practice, to understanding, to knowing our history, to knowing what our civilization is, to reading Hebrew, to basic text, to being able to actually explain the story of Hanukkah and knowing in what century it actually happened? If you want to continue Jewish atheism, you've been very successful. You take kids to Israel, tens of thousands of them. You take them to Tel Aviv. They surf. They go to a couple of museums. They go to the nightclubs. They go to Masada. They hike. They trek. They raft. They go to good restaurants. They eat good food. They have a blast. Costs you $10,000 a kid. You bring them home. I mean, do you think they're going to be running to a synagogue? Do you think they're going to be running
But
to
Judge Shmully, is that his definition of Jewish pride?
No, I said he's.
It's not. It's not. So, but in his world, what he's looking at, and what I've spoken to him also, and I know his new investment now in wanting to promote Hebrew among Jews. That's another new thing for him. It was an epiphany just 10 years ago when he started investing in Hebrew language learning. But for him, it's very different from the type of Jew that you're talking about. So to him, he's complaining that these folks that you're talking about don't feel that pride, that their drive for assimilation, their desire to be accepted is more powerful than what you're talking about. He has a very different definition of what it means to have Jewish pride.
So let me respond to that. The Hebrew language initiative is brilliant. It's genius. In fact, I think we should stop sending kids to Israel. We should pay them, instead of $10,000 to go to Israel, we should give them $1,000 to have an app with which they can learn the language Hebrew for 6 hours. I mean, one of the hurdles we have with teaching Jewish students anything Jewish in its original text is that there's a language barrier. You can't even sit down and open up a chumash and say, "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'haaretz." This is the language of our civilization. The Christians come to our table at Yale, and they know the New Testament, they know the Old Testament. They're quoting Isaiah 9, Isaiah 7, Jeremiah, and the Jewish kids are looking there. They couldn't even tell what the Ten Commandments are. That's A. So I think the Hebrew aspect, they don't even know. And so the Hebrew aspect is great. And obviously, Michael Steinhardt's having an epiphany. He's having a moment where he's asking himself this question. Now, let's just talk about Jewish pride. And let's go back to Israel. Jews today are told that we have a state of Israel because there was a Holocaust and the United Nations gave us a state. And there's a minority population in Israel, and we're not fair with that minority population. And so if you grew up in a home where the state of Israel, where the Jewish people's right to the land of Israel was because of a vote in the United Nations, and because in 1948 Jewish autonomy and independence and nationalism starts, then you're going to have a real crisis with defending the anti-Israel rhetoric, which we shouldn't justify because it's extreme and it's clearly anti-Semitic. We don't have a land of Israel because the United Nations gave us a land of Israel. We're the Jewish people. We're the oldest civilization in the world. We're the people of the Bible. The Christians know it. The Muslims know it. The atheists know it. So you're dealing with a generation today of students who don't even know the basics. So if it's the United Nations, then if the United Nations condemns Israel, then Israel has a problem. And I'm not saying we shouldn't follow the United Nations and we shouldn't listen to what the United Nations has to say, and Europe and America. But what is the premise built on? Where do we start with Jewish students? Where do we start? I mean, what are we starting with? So Michael wants to teach every kid in America Hebrew now. It's probably the best way he can spend his money. That's a great start. We need to educate young Jews to know what it means to be Jewish. And we've got to start at the beginning.
So this conversation brings us to sort of looking inward to the Jewish community about whatever the challenges of the Jew on campus might be. It sort of draws back to what you're talking about, whether it's lack of education or awareness or connection. How about talking about things that are not just about internal to the Jewish community, but what's going on campus? So, for example, there was this very widely commented article in Tablet recently called "The Vanishing of Jews from American Life." So that's not just about the Jewish campus, the Jew on campus, but how does that observation that he has about the vanishing of Jews have an impact of the experience of Jews on campus now in elite universities?
You can start this one. More broad.
Yeah, the vanishing Jew. I had a friend who was at the Yale School of Environmental Studies. I won't say her name. She went up to Princeton to do a PhD. She came running up to my house one day to tell me that Toby and I, we live on Prospect Street. It's probably a few hundred feet above sea level on the New Haven Harbor. If you kind of looked at New Haven, we have East Rock, we have West Rock, so we're up at the top of the hill. And she said, I'm doing studies on climate change, and I'm at the School of Environmental Studies, and Shmully, your house is at risk because the water levels are rising. And, we've got statistics, we've got numbers. She took the course, it's like, what is it? 68, Mark could probably I think it's 68 centimeters over the next 80 years is what they're worried about. But she ran the numbers and basically came to tell me that I was at risk. And I said, Rachel, I've got good news for you. I sleep with a life jacket. Under my pillow. All my kids have one strapped to their bed. And when it comes, we're gonna be ready. And we've got a rowboat in the back with 2 oars. And the hell with climate change. Now, we know the world is changing, and we know there's climate change. People are worried about the disappearing Jew. The Jews are going to disappear. So I've got good news for everybody. Jews aren't going anywhere. We're not disappearing. And the notion that outside forces are going to dictate to us the extent to which we survive as a people is ludicrous. No other minority in the world does that. There have been challenges in this country. The Black community had to fight for decades, centuries even, for their rights. The gay community fought for their rights. They were armed, they were educated, they lobbied, and they went on offense, and America changed. So Jews are a minority. Jews are a people. We're not disappearing. We're not vanishing. We need to, first of all, strengthen ourselves from inside. We need to give our children that pride. We need to learn from non-Jews who are part of minority groups who have that pride. Especially today, where you're seeing radical waves coming out of minority groups. I salute them. They're fighting for what they believe is right. Maybe the tactics aren't so good. Maybe politically it's not playing some out. Maybe it's sometimes to the detriment of other minority groups. That's the big political question. Again, I'm a rabbi. I won't comment on it. I will say something though about climate change. Mm-hmm. This will my final thing. And Mark is a climate attorney. You do climate. What's the description, Mark? It's climate. You're a climate lawyer. Is that right?
I work with people trying to
solve climate change. So I don't know a lot about climate change, but there's a great book out, The Sixth Extinction. Has anybody seen this book? Have you seen it? Yeah. So The Sixth Extinction. It's a woman, actually lives in Massachusetts, and she talks about the 5 extinctions over the last through history. And what's unique about the 6th one, which is upon us, is what they call the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene. Is that right? The Anthropocene. The Holocene, the Anthropocene. What's unique about this era that we're living in is that if we go extinct, I'm not talking about like the auk and the the Panamanian gold frog and who else went extinct? The white rhino's disappearing. I think there's like 25,000 out of 100,000 animals that are endangered, and every day you can actually witness extinction for the first time in history. We can actually see extinction in front of us. It used to take like millions of years for something to go extinct. Now you just walk outside and, that was the last butterfly, right? That was it. I saw the last one. And it's true. This is real. Like there are like some species that we have like 100 or 200 left of. So what's unique and what's so important about climate change and what the world is telling us, people who are fighting for climate change, is that we're going to be responsible for this one. If I'm wrong and New Haven floods in 100 years, and I just put a slate roof on my house, that should last about 120 years. That means I expect my grandchildren to live in my house. And if my children are living in my house and the water is actually rising in New Haven, and there's a strong possibility that we're not going to be able to stop it, and we didn't do anything about it, then we only have ourselves to blame, because we've been warned about carbon. We've been warned about rising water. We've been the warming of the glaciers, everything that's bringing this upon us. I'd like to introduce Judaism. Okay. So if the Jews are worried about vanishing, let's get together. Let's open a bottle, right? Good bottle of bourbon, good bottle of whiskey, maybe a vodka. And let's talk about what we're going to do about it. And let's get active.
Okay, let me bring something up that maybe is a little the vanishing Jew. Let's get back to reality in terms of what is happening in institutions, what's happening in higher education, what's happening elsewhere. One of the things we haven't talked about, and you mentioned in terms of other minority groups, is you don't have the internecine warfare. You don't have the natural fighting within. You don't have the challenge from within in these other groups. They're far more unified than Jews traditionally, argue with one another, fight with one another, create some of the own messes that we find. And so in reality, we all have examples. I mean, not telling any stories out of school. I've seen searches where the best candidate emerges and is a white male Jew, and I'm told we can't hire that person. All right, this is reality. So the Jews will persist, as you say, I'm convinced, but the institutions in which Jews have prospered over the years are being affected not by the Jews necessarily, although partially because many of these people telling me that we can't have another white male Jew are Jewish. So this issue that we have to talk about, getting everyone together, having bourbon, having vodka, hashing it out, will probably lead to more arguments, will probably lead to more disagreement, and not necessarily to addressing the issue that you seek to issue. So I want to bring it back to reality. What's happening in these institutions of higher ed in terms of in medicine, in places? What is happening to the Jew, and why is it happening? Why are the Jews becoming less and less present?
Do you have some thoughts on that to share?
Why do I?
Yes.
I do have some shorts because Jews have climbed the ladder. Jews have gone from being a minority and discriminated against to succeeding. And success has led to, in today's world, privilege. And privilege has led toward the idea of, changing that, of not perpetuating privilege, that people who are privileged have kept other people down, and it's time for others to have that chance. Now, that may be a good thing, as you say, but the reality is it's happening, and it's happening in many institutions, and it's something we should question.
Yeah. Mr. President, I got a WhatsApp from someone this week that said that 7 out of the 8 presidents of Ivy League schools in the U.S. right now are Jewish.
No longer true. That was
that's not true.
It's no longer true.
Okay,
No,
but
it's
was
not
it true in the last 10, 15 years?
It was once true.
Okay.
It's an old WhatsApp.
It's an old WhatsApp.
No,
okay.
It's fake news.
It's
That's
fake
what it
news.
is.
It's fake news. Okay, so let's assume it's not true. It was at one point true in the last 20 years. That was a fact.
And at one point, Harvard was 25% Jewish.
Okay, so I'm gonna respond to you as the president of Brandeis University, one of the most extraordinary universities in America. My recommendation with love and respect is that you solve this problem. So you haven't, let me finish. In other words, this is not something for me to deal with. But let me explain. So yes, there's a problem. Jews are losing jobs to minorities that may not even be appropriate for the job. And they're only getting it for reasons that are coming from radical, new radical policies in many instances. So my response is that higher education has to solve that problem. And hopefully they're going to, because frankly, if you lose the Jews in these universities, the ones that belong there, and you give the spots to people that don't belong there for other reasons, you're not going to be able to maintain your excellence. So perhaps Brandeis is the new Harvard because Brandeis is thinking about it. You're thinking about it. You're honest about it. You're saying it publicly and you're on tape. By the way, we're on CNBC. So you're saying that there's a problem. And I would say, yes, there's a problem. And we hope that people like yourself, Peter Salvi, the presidents of the great universities today in America, are going to really rethink what's going on in this country. We have faculty at Yale that tell me, tenured faculty, they can't even open their mouth anymore in a classroom. Students who are changing what they're writing in their papers because to pass a grade today, you have to write what's politically correct. I'm not getting into the details. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, whether it's woke or far left, gender studies, gender identities, all those things. So there is a crisis, yes. As far as why Jews today are assimilating, I think you touched on that, and we've become privileged, and we've kind of, suburban flight, we've made it, we've arrived. Okay, so now let's give another minority a chance. It's probably a good thing. We should think about there are new minorities that have emerged. in America. And so Jews have always been at the forefront of civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. And so we're maybe today, Jews, maybe to an extreme today, but to some extent, we're standing up for those minorities. But I would say that the problem of arriving and then ignoring what's happening to ourselves is because we're not there anymore as Jews. We're not there as Jews. If we were there as Jews, informed Jews, knowledgeable Jews, I'm not talking about religious or observant, but Jews that actually know, we would be fighting that battle from a different place. And the failure is a rabbinical failure. We have failed as rabbis. The universities you have your challenges. We as rabbis have failed in giving. And by the way, the Catholic Church, to some extent, has failed too. Their numbers are way down too. Let me just say this. We have failed in giving young people, bright people, an exciting reason to think about the things I'm talking about religion, about ancient texts, about rabbinics, about our history, about our civilization. We have failed to communicate it in ways that are compelling. There's so much data coming at a 19-year-old today in the world. The notion that I need to go study Talmud for what? For reason to go read Isaiah, to go read Jeremiah, to open up a Mishnah. What? Give me a reason to do it with all the things I have access to at a second on the internet, on campus, etc. So rabbis are failing at that. Hence, Jewish identity is down. Universities have a new form of affirmative action that they want to propose. Let's see where they go with it. They're in big trouble. Big trouble. Big trouble. In fact, Brandeis should be raising $1 billion today, with all due respect. And, I'd love to help you do it. Michael Steinhardt, going back to Michael. I went to him with the dean of, I set up a meeting. I must say this. At one point, we wanted to have a center for Jewish law at the Yale Law School. And Robert Post was the dean. Phenomenal man with whom I studied Talmud. I used to come to his office and we used to study Talmud. His brain was blown out studying Talmud. 5, 6 languages on a page, 1,000 years of sages arguing over basic economic things that we think of today as common law. And we studied Talmud together and we became very good friends. And then we said, let's open a center for Jewish law. Tony Crumman was his predecessor, and Robert said, and I said, let's do it. And I said, I'll help you raise the money. I'm not proposing I'll raise $1 billion for Brandeis, but this was a small story, and it involves Michael. And I said, let's go to Michael Steinhardt, a center for Jewish law at the Yale Law School. It would deal with Jewish law and Israel law, and we'd clarify some of the misconceptions about Israeli soldiers indiscriminately killing kids in Gaza, the lies that the world tells about our soldiers. And I said to Mike, I went down to Michael and I said, I want to bring the dean and the former dean of the law school to do this. Harvard has a center for Jewish law. And he says to me, Shmully, I'm in talks with the divinity school at Harvard about we're talking about $25 million. And I said, Michael, the divinity schools died in the 70s. Where are you? Divinity school? With all due respect to anybody who has a degree in divinity school. Who goes to divinity school today? Who goes to divinity school? I said, Michael, we're talking about the Yale Law School here. Israel, you're worried about the existential threat? About students not being able to articulate how Israel defends itself as a nation, as a state? Nothing to do with God or religion, even the modern state. And Robert Post ended up, we were on the road. We tried to recruit somebody. NYU got the person. It didn't happen. And Robert Post emailed me when he stepped down from his deanship. And he said, Shmully, I saw the promised land, but I didn't enter he really wanted to do it. I saw the promised land, but I didn't enter the promised land. And I said, Robert, you're like Moses. But the people entered the promised land. Moses died and was buried in the desert. The people entered the promised land. And it will happen in the right time with the right thing. So that's my thought.
So I want to open it up. I think people are going to have lots of questions. I do want to hear one more clarification, though, so to make it easier for people to ask questions, which is when you say that these are real problems in real life, practically speaking, and you're saying Brandeis should fix those problems.
Who else?
Yes, but what does it mean to fix them when the conversation keeps coming back to our responsibility internally as a Jewish community of how we failed, which of course we need to engage and address and think about. But how do we fix these problems that are beyond the Jewish community? We haven't gotten much sort of an opinion for our audience to react to, which is in addition to our internal sort of evaluation of what we have failed at, that helps explain the experience of the Jew on campus today. What about the outside world can be changed to help make things better?
I have one short answer. I was sitting at a Friday night Shabbat dinner at in our mansion. I'm going to hit you. Just going to hit back head on. Let's just the elephant in the room. A Catholic girl, sophomore at Yale, and she was sitting next to me, and she was invited by a friend to come to our Shabbos dinner table, and I don't remember her name. I have to confess. It was midnight. And I said, so what do you do at Yale? She says, I'm a sophomore. What's your major? And she's, maybe neuroscience or something in the sciences. So what else do you do? She says, I swim. So I said, oh, you swim. You're on the swim team. So I said, are you competing against men today?
No.
I mean, we're very open at Shabtai. We ask questions. We're pretty open. And it's a place where people like Catholic girls can come and sit at a Shabbos table and actually say what she thinks. She says, yeah, I do compete against men who claim to be women today on the in the varsity swim team. And I said, how's it going? She says, well, we can't win. And I said to her, as a sophomore from the Midwest, I said, you can't win. So what are you doing on the swim team? Now, she may have been a recruit to swim, right? She may really want to just swim. She probably loves to swim. And she told me she can't win. And she says, well, what should I do? I said, well, if I was on a team and I was competing against women on something that I know women are better at, there's a lot of things that women are better than men at, and I couldn't win, I'd step off the team and go to a place where I could excel. If you can no longer win the swim competition because you're competing against men who claim they're women, you've got to do something about it. You're Catholic. You need to be a proud Catholic. And if you grew up with certain values about your identity as a woman and men, that we were created by God in the image of God, and there's a man and there's a male and there's a female, and that's really what you believe in, those are your principles, and you're at Yale and it's ruining your swim career, you should go back. And she says, it's not that simple. I said, I know, but it takes one person on the team. I bet you there's a lot of your friends on that team that are thinking what you're thinking. And somebody's got to be the hero. And maybe that would be the greatest thing you achieve at Yale in 4 years. And maybe you'll end up in the front page of the paper and maybe you get a lot of backlash. But the notion that you can't win a swim competition because you're competing against people that you can't physically win against is something you should think about. I never saw the girl again. And I don't know what happened. And I'm assuming she's still on the team. But those are the conversations we have to have. We have to have them with sophomores and we have to have them with presidents in the universities.
Any comments you want to share with the
I
audience
hope I have
about
a comment on this.
what reform or making things better might look like? Practically speaking, like you said?
Well, again, I have to say that Brandeis is in an exceptional situation because I don't face the type of issues for the Jew on campus that most university presidents do. Having said that, I do feel Brandeis has an obligation, a responsibility to speak about this and to do something about this. And in fact, we have. Over the last year and a half, we've had conversations. I've had conversations both with the board, extensive conversations with the board of trustees, and also with alums, and also on campus, although less successful, about this very issue, about what Brandeis's place in the Jewish world is when it comes to Jews on campus. And it's been very interesting. And in some ways, it's been very encouraging because our board is very supportive of making the case that it's important for Brandeis to lead in this area and to ensure that, I hate to use the word safe or haven, but that is a place where Jews can be Jews, where Jews can be proud to be Jews, where Jews can wear their Stars of David on the outside. They don't have to worry about it. In fact, that is more or less the case at Brandeis today. However, it should be the case at all universities. And so the question for us is how to articulate this. And we've been talking more and more publicly about Brandeis, reconnecting to its Jewish roots and remembering its founding. Now, at its founding in 1948, it wasn't only about Jews. It was also about being open to all. And so I like to liken the situation today as like threading a needle with no hole, trying to exert what it means to be Jewish and to protect the place of Jews on campus, but at the same time, not close out that openness that what Brandeis stood for in 1948 to all other groups. And that's a very, very difficult road to hoe. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reestablish Brandeis as a Jewish institution, that it's important for Jews to come to Brandeis, but at the same time, not be closed to others.
I need 90 seconds of that because I want to say something about Louis Brandeis, and just to invoke him. And for those of us who don't know, Louis Brandeis was one of the great jurists of the 20th century. and he fought for some of the things that have changed America. Minimum wage, hours of employment,
Privacy.
he was privacy, and then free speech,
Antitrust.
on and on and on and on and on. And yet he was one of the great Zionists of the 20th century. And he actually, there's a book which I bought.
Not yet, and
Well, one could argue that Zionism wasn't conflict to being. How could you become a Supreme Court justice in America and essentially promote and advocate for the formation of a Jewish state? What did it say about as an American Jew? Where is your loyalty? We worry about dual loyalty, right? And so he lectured and he fought, and he, from the Balfour Declaration with Wilson, and then in the FDR time, and he wrote books, and he became the president of the organization that was basically the strongest thing. I think we have to end with this, because I think what it says is that he was an American. He was not religious. He wasn't observant. He was a German Jew, came in the 19th century, but he knew that the Jews, to be a better American, Jews needed to have their and to some extent his homeland. As Jews, we should be advocating for minorities. I tell Catholics to go to church, and if you're a Muslim, you should pray, and you should look at the good things in your religion. And if you're gay, you should not be ashamed to say it. And if you're part of a minority group, and we have a very diverse population on campus, as you do, you have bigger challenges. We're a Jewish organization, unapologetically, unconditionally, but we're welcome the world. But when we're strong in our identity, people are going to be strong in their identities, and that's what makes America wonderful. We don't proselytize. We're not looking to make people conform. We want to have a diverse, strong America, a real multicultural pluralism that allows us to stand in the street with our yarmulke, with our turban, frankly, with the burqa. I don't care. And you can, if you want to wear a mini skirt and go sleeveless. People, that's the great thing about America, right? So we need to strengthen others in their battles. And Brandeis. What is it? You're the hosts, right? That was what Soccer said. That was
Soccer's line, that finally the host at last.
Yeah.
Two very strong presentations. Eager to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
So it's not so much a question as a curious kind of concern, or I'm very respectful of the conversation and the concern about the disappearing Jew. But if you broaden it out, there is a general sense that across the board that there is a lessening or disappearance of religious, I don't guess loyalty, I don't know what you want to put it. And I do understand, obviously, from being very close to my lovely daughter, that there is a great identity in being Jewish. But if you need to put in broader context, I would be curious about, don't you see this across the board with people, that they are losing faith, they're losing their whatever identity it is? And I know there's a sort of special place for you, but I don't know. I just want to broaden it out, looking at bigger history.
Well, I think you're bringing out a point that we didn't really talk much on, but it does highlight the fact that to feel Jewish and to be Jewish is beyond religion. And so the association or the identity with being Jewish, of course, is cultural, is ethnic, is beyond religion. And so to compare the two, yes, there is a diminishing of religious observance and association and affiliation. But in the Jewish world, to be Jewish or to feel Jewish pride or to be Jewish goes beyond the religious. So I think that there's a difference there.
Not much to add other than the fact that I tell the students at Yale that they hung God on the old campus. They crucified him. And in the modern sense, yeah, God is, we're living in a probably a more godless world. The numbers are down across denominations in all religions in America. And it's, Instagram is the new God. And so let's see where it goes. I think a lot of us as parents and grandparents are very concerned about that. Even if we don't believe in God, we know what the nuclear family is. We know deep down about some of the crises that we're facing, because it's a world that has, to a large extent, left so much of traditional, even Western values, not even religious, at bay, and we've replaced it with a new form of worship, and it's a challenging times. The tide's rising, and America will have to deal with it probably in our next election.
So you've raised some fascinating points. What I haven't heard is, how do you bring people together so that they feel safe enough to share their story, their lived experience, their perspective about an issue, for example, like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the reason I raise this, I come from Tufts University, where, as you know, Mr. President, there is a lot more tension around this topic, and my student Zoe probably knows that very, very well. And I've been asked by students, I have a dialogue center, we bring people together to share conversations, and we work really hard on behalf of the students who say to us, we want sufficient safety to tell our stories. We want to make sure that in those spaces we do not conflate feeling unsafe with feeling uncomfortable. In fact, we want to feel uncomfortable. We want to feel just about uncomfortable enough so we can share our stories. So my question to you both, how do you think about creating sufficient safety? There's no such thing as absolute safety, clearly, but how do you create sufficient safety so people can come together and really listen with curiosity, with empathy, to understand another person's lived experience? Where do you find opportunities to create those type of conversations on your campus and beyond?
That's a great question.
It's a great question, and this is the great challenge today. And I do think, as a university, it should, of course, come through the curriculum and through student organizations. Let me just say a few things that have occurred. So we had a peace and conflict program that was voted out by the faculty in the last 5 years. It's gone. It was very popular coming out of the 60s and 70s, and it happened to have a dynamic leader who retired, and there was no one to take it over. Not because there is an interest in this issue, but because there's controversy surrounding it, and there's a lot of risk for faculty members to take on and create the type of environment you say. We had a course that was set up 4 or 5 years ago, founded by our VP for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, not by our faculty member. However, he did get 5 faculty members each year to participate. And in fact, those types of conversations did occur. I mean, there were some, you look at the syllabus of that course, you look at the things they were reading, the controversies that went through, and it was a huge success. It was on a tiny scale of 3,600 undergraduates. There were 20 students, limited to 20 students in that class, but that was one success. On the student organization front, the adults can learn from the students. We have a student organization whose success waxes and wanes depending upon the leadership of that group, but it's called Bridges. And this student organization brings together African-American students and Jewish students to study their heritages, their backgrounds, and so forth. Each year they go on a trip representative of each group's history and past to learn more about their past. So one year they go into Auschwitz. Next year they went to Eastern Brazil to see where the slave trade was. The next year they went to Morocco to learn about non-Ashkenazi Jews together. Again, how many students are in that group? 40 to 50. Okay, we haven't been able to replicate that and grow that. We passed a new curriculum about 6 years ago on campus. One of the things was difficult dialogues or some name like that. I went to 2 of them, highly disappointing because they put 2 faculty members in front of the room and they're supposed to model difficult conversations. They don't. It's basically more of the same. So the challenge is before us, but I do think it has to come through the curriculum. It has to come with the faculty feeling that they own this. But the reality is there's risks. And if you're an untenured faculty member and you don't hew the ideological line of the time, then your tenure, of course, is questionable, at least in the minds of untenured faculty members. So we have a lot of work to do. I think we know how to do this, or we know what needs to be done. The question is how to create that. It's not a safe space necessarily for students, but a safe space for the faculty members, really.
Did you have an answer?
I think he said.
Question.
I should add one last thing, or else I'd be unfair. Our chaplaincy also, it's very complicated at Brandeis. Our chaplaincy is very responsible also for bringing together groups. The head of our chaplaincy is our Hillel rabbi, and that's just an historical artifact. Also with the fact that heading the chaplaincy at a place like Brandeis, if it weren't a Jew or a rabbi, would be problematic. But I think our rabbi, our Hillel rabbi, has had great success in bringing together the various groups. Again, limited in scope and not necessarily across the campus that had a huge impact, but important.
Hi, Stephen Griffiths. Thanks so much for this tonight. It's been great. Going back to what you said about Instagram being the new god and, social media eroding some of the, contributing towards the disappearance of Jewishness. I think back to, in my own undergraduate studies, I wrote about the Muslim diaspora and how actually social media and a sense of urgency in London communities and other places actually strengthened in wildly different ways a renewed sense of Muslim identity in the youthful generation in the last 20 years. So there is a way to harness technology and social media. And I'm curious both your perspectives on, one, how that technology can be utilized in a way to reverse the disappearance of Jewishness, and two, how to maybe create that sense of urgency that was harnessed by the Muslim diaspora.
Well, you started with the app, Shmuley. You can continue with that. You have the app that's going to teach us 600 words.
No, I think it's a great question, and in fact, I was talking to Professor Kilman here, I believe, before. Yeah, about this. I think, or it was a conversation, or I was having today. You're absolutely correct that technology can be, should be, and is to a large extent being harnessed for so much positive things in the world, including religious affiliation and religious education. In fact, as a campus rabbi, I'm not running a yeshiva at Yale. I'm not running a rabbinical seminary. We're running a Jewish society, and people come in for a few hours one night and a few hours the next night, and they'll sit for 6 hours, 8 hours, and have conversations. And the question for myself and Toby as directors and the people who are responsible for the institution, we ask ourselves sometimes, how do we measure results? Like, what is the agenda? What is the result? How do you measure results? And the answer is that every good deed and every conversation and every smile and every interaction between people is positive if it's done peace and harmony and loving. Every time somebody says a blessing, or someone smiles at someone, or meets a new person and learns something from them and shares something with them and has a pleasant experience with them, something great is happening. Obviously, coming to a home 20 years later, after two of our closest friends graduated and being hosted here tonight, for us, it's just the greatest joy in the world. We were friends then. We're about the same age. There was no rabbi, member relationship. We were peers with our students when we were their age. We're peers with our students when they're our children's age. The internet should be, and to some extent is, and needs to be much more of a resource. You can light a fire and hope they're coming back. So one short answer. I said 25 years ago when I came to Yale, I asked students who the Baal Shem Tov was. Now, the Baal Shem Tov, if you know who the Baal Shem Tov was, raise your hand. You know something about the Baal Shem Tov. Half of us know who the Baal Shem Tov was. Okay. So the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. I'm a Chassid, I'm a Liebowitzer. So for us, the Baal Shem Tov was paramount. If I asked students 25 years ago on campus who the Baal Shem Tov was, most of them would have said no. But if I asked students at Yale 25 years ago who Martin Buber was, most of them would have said yes. Now, how many of you know who Martin Buber is, or know of Martin Buber? Okay. So more of us know who Martin Buber is. If you've read, you know who Martin Buber is. We sat down on campus a couple of weeks ago and asked active members of Shabtai, these are supposed to be the people on campus who are the ambassadors to campus for Jewish pride in their society, how many of them knew who Martin Buber was? The answer is nobody knew who Martin Buber is. So I had given them each a book by Martin Buber, Hasidism and the Modern Man. Now here's the magic. I was sitting on the holiday of Shavuos. We just celebrated the giving of the Torah, and there was a fifth-year graduate student in Assyriology, brilliant Israeli, secular from Israel, doesn't believe in rabbis, doesn't believe in religion. He's an Israeli, he's a Sabra, he's a Kibbutznik, probably third generation. And we talked about Buber. And I said, have you read Buber? And he said, no. I said, I got a book on my shelf, take it home. And I gave him the book. 24 hours later, I woke up and I had an email. He had written a short dissertation on Martin Buber. And I said, wow, how fortunate am I to live in a town where you can hand the kid a book. This happens every day, right? And you get a review of the book, a real review of the book, a critique of the book, the questions about the book a day later. And I said, you know what? You just got to hand books out. They're going to read them. Now, we're in a specific place in the universe. It's called New Haven. It's Yale, Brandeis, etc. But it was so wonderfully, I was so excited to know. Now he can do whatever he wants with Martin Buber. He can read about Martin Buber. Martin Buber can lead him to the Baal Shem Tov. He can go read text because the internet's wide open. So that's where the internet's going to come into play. And people are doing it, and they're having virtual communities, and they're meeting other people, and they're learning, and they're watching videos. There's tens and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of hours today. You can study anything about any religion today in depth at the deepest level. I mean, I could take Stephen Greenblatt's Shakespeare class on the internet and walk around Yale's campus and make pretend that I got a PhD with Stephen Greenblatt at Harvard in Shakespeare just by taking his classes on the internet. It's the same thing with Judaism, and I'm assuming the same thing with all religions. So the answer is yes, it's got to be harnessed, and we've got to do it, but you got to start somewhere.
I study the Jews. I study contemporary Jews. I study lots of students, and I have a different impression of what's going on than I think has been talked about this evening. And I think in the roots of what we are seeing from data are some ideas about how to proceed, how to respond. So the first thing I want to say is that this generation of young adults, the ones who are in school now, the ones who've recently graduated, are actually much better educated than their parents' generation, Jewishly educated. They're much more likely to be involved in Jewish life. Our notion that things used to be so wonderful and they've gotten so bad, and what do we do to prevent this crisis from exploding, just isn't true. More people are doing Jewish things. The Jewish population has increased over the last 30 years, close to 35%. More of them are engaged in synagogues and learning and all kinds of things. And in fact, on campuses, and this was a development that started at Brandeis. We were the first secular university to have a Jewish studies program. And now there's no university that doesn't have a Jewish studies program. There's no university that doesn't have a large university that doesn't have Hillel, Chabad, other Jewish learning organizations. That never, ever happened before. And so we have a very different situation. And I think what it suggests is that as much as we want to wring our hands and talk about the crisis, and maybe that motivates us and donors and whatever, in fact, what we have been doing is changing things. I also study this program called Birthright Israel. 800,000 people have now participated in the program, 500,000 from North America. And what's so interesting about it is that it is a program designed to build amiyut, designed to build a sense of peoplehood, of connection. And, of the 800,000 people, 750,000 of them come back and they say, this has transformed my life. And this has transformed my life because I feel that I am part of something bigger than myself. I want to combine these two ideas and then get your reactions on the ground to what we can do about it. So on the one hand, we have the educational resources to engage people in Judaism in a way that has never been possible before. And on the other hand, I think we live at a time the Surgeon General has called loneliness a national disease and is ready to launch a public health initiative to address it. We have a sense of disconnection from one another. And here comes Judaism with, if you will, proven strategies to help people feel that they're connected to other people. And I don't know, my question is, in essence, yes, maybe we should be wringing our hands, but we should be wringing our hands and scratching our heads, it seems to me, to figure out how we take what we already know we can do and make that even more available, and make it available not only to building social capital within the Jewish community, but spreading it further along. So I welcome your reactions.
Let me react. First of all, I respect Len's work as much as anyone's work at Brandeis. So it's not in any way my disagreement with some of the things that you said that I'm going to say is nothing about that. It all depends where your bar is. Is it superficial or is it deep? I mean, you talk about all the universities having Jewish studies. I look at the enrollments across the country in Jewish studies. I look at the enrollments in Hebrew across the country or at Brandeis. and it's nothing like it used to be. So as where this group might be better associated in some way with Jewish peoplehood, the educational piece of it is not nearly as robust as it once was. And it's not just at Brandeis, it's across the country that we see that. So I guess my response to that is I agree there are successes, there are great successes, but it depends on where you place that bar. How much or how deep connection are we looking for to define positive trends in what it means to be Jewish? And yeah, I do think there are some successes, but I also do think we're wringing our hands for a reason.
Did you have something you want to say?
I will say one thing on that. I appreciate the fact that you mentioned there's obviously a lot of positive things, wonderful things, thanks to people like Michael Starnhart and other philanthropists that are doing these things, and hopefully more. But I will just end with I will answer this question by reading something that I wrote down today before coming here. Going back to Brandeis, Louis Brandeis was referred to by the President of the United States as Old Isaiah. In fact, I think FDR wrote him letters called Dear Isaiah, is the way he referred to him. Isaiah was the prophet. If you read the book of Isaiah, Yeshayahu, what's interesting about it is you have exactly what you just said, what we've been saying, and what people in this room are hopefully thinking about. This dichotomy, right? Technology is a good thing. Technology is also draining our children's brains out. There's a revival, there's a renaissance, but our numbers are disappearing. Nobody at Yale's taking Judaic studies. I shouldn't say nobody, maybe there's a handful of students. I know what the class size you are.
There's one Judaic studies major right now.
Yeah. How many students are taking the class? How many people take Paul Franks or take Ellie Stern? Have you taken any of the classes?
Not yet.
No, you don't have to. You're a strong Jew, but for those, it's very, very small. So you have this dichotomy. So I would say this: if you read Yeshayahu, Isaiah the prophet, I'm assuming most of the people in this room have never actually read the book. Some of us have, and some of us have studied in depth. We have some very serious scholars with us here tonight. Isaiah talks about the doomsday scenario. He really does. He talks about the apocalypse, like it's really going to get really, really bad. And he predicts terrible things happening. At the same time, Yeshayahu talks about the Gar Zev and Keves, that the wolf will lie with the lamb, the utopian era when all nations will unite, peace in the world, harmony, swords into plowshares, right? The ultimate world of peace, world peace, etc. So one book contains both of these divergent messages, and they both come out of this old Isaiah, this dear Isaiah, the prophet. I must read you the first few verses of Isaiah. I have to. Just familiarize yourselves a little bit with Hebrew. Chazayin Yeshayahu ben Amitz, Asher Chazal Yehuda of Yerushalayim b'mei Uziyahu Yisam Achaz Yechezkiyahu Malch Yehuda. The vision of Isaiah, the son of Amitz, who looked out on Judah, Jerusalem in the days of Uziyahu, Yisam Achaz Yechezkiyahu Malch Yehuda, the kings of Judah. Shimu Shemayim, hearken heavens, listen heavens, Vazinu Eretz, and listen, the ground should listen. Ki Hashem Dibar, for God has spoken. Banim Gidalti v'Remamti v'Heim Pishubi. My children, I raised them, I lifted them up, v'Heim Pishubi, but they rebelled against me. Isaiah is talking about terrible things to come. And he says, Yadashar Kineu, the ox knows his master. The ox knows his master. Who puts the saddle on, or puts the plow on, or feeds him in the morning. The ox knows, there's a routine. The chamar of Osbailov, and the chamar, the donkey, who eats every day, knows where his food comes from. And then he says, Yisrael la yada, but the Jews, la yada, don't, the literal translation is la yada, they don't know. Ami la yisbainan, my nation is not contemplative. My nation is not thinking. What Isaiah is saying is, look, there are two roads ahead of us. One is looking really good. One is looking not so good, which is the conversation tonight we had. Fantastic conversation. But what does Isaiah open up the book with? He opens up with Yisrael Yada Amilis Bainan. The way I read it, the ox knows who his master is. The donkey knows who his master is. Yisrael La Yada. He says Yisrael, the Jews, La Yada. He doesn't say he doesn't know who his God is. He says La Yada. He doesn't know. It's sheer ignorance. Amilay is Bainan. My people aren't thinking. Amilay is Bainan. Isaiah is telling This is thousands of years ago. We don't know. We're not thinking. Now we're living in an amazing scientific world that has progressed unbelievably scientifically, medically, in so many ways. We're smarter than we've ever been. And yet Isaiah is saying something that's so true. It starts with Layada and Layispainen. To what extent are we really thinking? And to what extent are we Hispainen? Are we contemplating the consequences, where we're going as people, as Americans, as Jews, as highly educated people? And then a few verses later, he says, Lami li zavchechem, don't bring your sacrifices. Don't even bring your money, Isaiah says. Your money's not going to solve the problems. It's here. What are we doing? And so I think it's more of this. This is an honor to sit with you and to see. I mean, frankly, I don't envy you. I mean, you've got, an amazing opportunity, amazing privilege. You're running an amazing institution. You've got unbelievable, some of the greatest scholars in the world are teaching at your university. And you're struggling with some of the things that are just the trends in the country. So we got to go back to old Isaiah, who inspired Louis Brandeis who always wanted the farmer and the little guy to be educated, less hours so he can go home and read, and to think deeply, critically, and to argue and to challenge ourselves, our children, our peers, our loved ones, our neighbors, our enemies about the critical issues. And I have as much confidence in you, frankly, that it's going to be okay, and technology is going to be the harness. And I think we're seeing it, and it's endless. You can go home and read the book, and then you can go on the internet, and you can do anything you want today because of technology. So yeah, Instagram is a new god. It's got to be just realigned to the things that are important.
Beautiful. Do you want to share your
I think you need to close.
I don't need.
There's always no close up. You got to do some comment. You got to critique Isaiah. I mean, you got to say something.
can't
Was he
critique
right?
Isaiah.
Was he wrong?
I can't critique Isaiah, especially since it's Louis Brandeis at the center there. So no, I can't. No, I appreciate the conversation. I also appreciate the. I don't need this. The rabbinic perspective on this. Again, I come at it from a fully secular perspective, and the reality of what's on the ground and the reality of what is contemporary, what's going on in contemporary society that, of course, influences the university. But I also, as I said at the outset, I come at it from the perspective of there's one Brandeis. There are 107 HBCUs in the country. There are 265 Catholic-sponsored universities in the country. There's one Brandeis. And so therefore I come at it always thinking about what is the role Brandeis should play, what is the responsibility Brandeis should play, and it's an ongoing effort. It's a struggle.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, I have the opportunity to say a few closing words. It has been an incredible dialogue. Thank you, President Liebowitz, Professor Liebowitz, Dr. Liebowitz, Shmully, Rabbi Hecht. It's been an honor to have you here in our house speaking. I love that Shmully started with a story. Very rabbinic. I'm not sure what it meant, but it was funny. Rabbi
was right, by the way. The Rabbi Lemmer did die eventually.
Exactly. I thought the joke was going to be the prior rabbi had died. It was true. Thinking about Jew on campus, my story, one that I think about is, it was Yom Kippur, my freshman year. Fasted all day, went to Chinese food with my friends to break the fast. My friend sitting next to me orders wonton with shrimp. I look at him, with pork. And I say, how can you fast for 26 hours and then eat pork? And then I order the wonton with shrimp because I grew up in a house where, pork was unkosher, but shrimp was only kind of unkosher. and he looked at me and I was like, all right, okay, I get it. All right, But my path to sort of a more involved Judaism on campus was not, Shmully wasn't even there when I was an undergrad, and it wasn't a rabbi, even though it was Jim Ponette, who was the Hill rabbi at Yale, is a father figure, a dear friend. It was actually a friend of mine, a Catholic woman who was, I was eating lunch with her in the dining hall. And after lunch, I said, where are you going? She said, I'm going to church. And I was like, wait, you're going to church voluntarily on a Thursday afternoon? I have to see what this is about. So I followed her there, and I walked in and I was blown away by the fact that everyone was in that church seeking something higher, and there by choice. And I grew up in a Jewish family. I loved my beautiful Jewish tradition, but it never occurred to me that you would go to synagogue because you were seeking something. And so I credit this friend and this experience as making me want to go find that in Judaism. But it also means for me that it's deeply I feel very grateful that I have the Jewish tradition. We have the Jewish tradition. It's enriched our lives, and we have an amazing community. But I'm deeply aware of how that exists in every tradition. I love, Shmully, that you acknowledged that in some of your remarks. I do want to call out my brilliant mother-in-law and note that I think her question about acknowledging, the response to say, oh, well, other religions are, Judaism's more than a religion. That's true. But other cultures are also, it's not just religion that is fading from American life. It's connection to any cultural identity, right? And one of the things that is, I'm often struck by is talking to people in our broader community and how people talk about loneliness. There was the reference to the Surgeon General's talk about loneliness, and we lost community. And one of the things that I'm just so deeply grateful for our Jewish community is how, we have this very tight community. We've raised our friends. We've raised our kids together. One of those kids who's here and who I feel like it is like another child to me and part of our family. And I feel like it's that richness. And this brings me back to another thing that Shmully, you said, which was this notion that Judaism, this concept that that so many people are Jewish, they associate it with things that like anti-Semitism or the Holocaust or things that they, or some sense of guilt or whatever it is. And I feel like the thing that I've always appreciated is to be able to have the tradition be Jewish because it offers something to you, which I think every tradition has, is like, how can these traditions enrich our lives? And if we're doing it just because of a sense of just, we want to be Jewish because it's that sense of we should be Jewish or whatever, like my Indian friends of mine who talk about their Indian parents who said like, there's the same, it's very similar. It's like similar cultural thing, right? It's like, you know what you have and you want your kid to have the same thing because that's what's familiar. But like, how is it actually advancing the world? How is it actually making the world a richer place? How is it actually connecting us and helping us solve the problems, not only of loneliness, but of all the social problems that we're facing in this world? And so it makes me think, you mentioned Isaiah. Isaiah, every year on Yom Kippur, we talk about Isaiah saying, well, while we're sitting there fasting in synagogue, Isaiah says, I don't want your fasts of righteousness. Don't just fast because you think you're so special because you're fasting. Like, I want you to actually take that fast and take that practice and turn it into something where you're actually helping people in need and helping the poor. And I just hope that as we're talking about the importance of being Jewish, and the importance of the Jew on campus, which, by the way, in my mind, the Jews are doing okay. I get what you guys are saying, but like, Jews in America, we're doing okay. We should continue to do okay, but there's a lot of communities that are not doing nearly as okay. So how can we take the strength of our tradition and our community and help lift up others as well? That I just hope we'll maintain that spirit as well. But just overall, just feel so grateful for this dialogue, so grateful to have been able to host this for everyone participating, and just thank you. I hope for many, many more of these.